It's not a smooth sailing, especially on the North Atlantic. And you and I, we love it because we love ocean liners and we love that traditional maiden voyage. We love Titanic. We love the history behind the immigrants. And, it's just nice to redo that, to actually live that experience and see the Statue of Liberty appearing on the horizon, although ideally not at 4:30 in the morning.
That's so true. It's something that so many people before us have experienced. The Transatlantic Crossing is so special because it is not just a large body of water, and these days a seven-day crossing where you're at sea the entire time. Of course, back in the day of the early steamers, it was over 2 weeks at sea. But, it's also that port arrival, particularly into New York, that so many people saw when they were relocating to America in search of a better life. And there's so many stories in the archives of people who write home about the experience of standing on the deck of the ship and looking up at the Statue of Liberty as the ship arrived in. It was very interesting, actually, because my first transatlantic crossing on Queen Mary 2, we were standing up on the bit just beneath the bridge, and we were looking down at the Statue of Liberty. So the ships have obviously got a lot bigger since those early days. But it is an iconic body of water. It has a lot of romance attached to it. The Titanic story brought an extra level of history and of intrigue with people around the world. But there are so many ships that sailed that body of water, and so many people. I mean, if you think about America and Canada today, how many people can trace their heritages back to somebody taking a transatlantic crossing from Europe to relocate in search of what they were hoping would be a better life at the time?
And the European nations, they all had their own ships, didn't they? They had these great ships that represented the strength and the might, and so hence the speed and the luxury. We know about France and the Normandy. We know about Italy and the Rex, for example. These were the countries that dominated the North Atlantic. These days, though, there's only one ship that does a scheduled service. Every other ship, if it's offering a transatlantic, it invariably is a repositioning cruise, which is just allowing the ship to start a new season in another part of the world. And invariably those crossings can actually be quite affordable. A repositioning cruise is often a lot cheaper than a regular trip. But if we just talk to Queen Mary 2 for a second from Cunard, and I hate to boast, but it's the only thing I have to boast, is how I've done all 4 maiden transatlantic crossings, starting in 2004 with Queen Mary 2, then Queen Victoria, then Queen Elizabeth, and most recently in January on Queen Anne, which is where this photograph behind us was taken. And I like to remind people that it's actually the same price if you book at the right time as a flight. So you can literally go in economy, and economy fare is £500, $650 thereabouts approximately. I saw the transatlantic crossing advertised for $509 the other day.
Yeah,
I mean, it's ridiculous. That's under £400.
It's amazing, actually. If you had the time, if you have the 7 days. Like the idea of flying in economy across the Atlantic versus going on the Queen Mary 2 in any cabin category, it's a no-brainer as far as I'm concerned.
It's ridiculous, isn't it? Considering that you get 1, or if you're lucky, 2 little bento-style meals on the aeroplane, which are overly processed and disgusting, and you have to eat them with miniature paper
if your
silverware.
arms in like this, you're not knocking
That's
anyone
right.
on the other side.
And the alternative to that is for the same price, the Britannia dining room for 7 nights. Now, back in the day, in 2004, when I did the first crossing, Cunard were running that ship doing 5- and 6-day crossings. These days, it's 7- or 8-day crossings. Tell us why they've changed it.
Well, there was this drive for speed back in the era of the ocean liner. So if you take a step back just before the aircraft really sort of took over, so piston-driven airplanes, pre-jets, they really weren't efficient doing transatlantic crossings. They had to make fuel stops, and many of them didn't have the range. And it was considered to be a relatively dangerous way to travel on planes. It was scary to go across the Atlantic on an unpressurized aircraft that was flying below the weather. So people went by ship, even after aircraft became a viable potential second option. And these ships, they got faster and faster, not all of them, but the express liners. So we often focus on the express liners, the ones that were, the biggest and the fastest that were trying to do that express service. There was lots of other ships, hundreds of other ships that were doing it much slower.
But England had Queen Mary and Queen Elizabeth basically going back and forth.
It was a ferry service. Yeah, they achieved this long-held ambition after World War II of having a 2-ship weekly express service. So basically, these 2 massive ships that were big enough to depart and sort of pass in the middle and be on the other side within a week and be able to turn around and do it again. They achieved that to a level that no other shipping line was quite able to achieve, partly because Britain and America were positioned geographically well for that. If you were doing voyages out of the Mediterranean, you had extra time that you had to take to get to the Atlantic, but also because the scale and size of the two queens, and so that service was ultimately. I mean, Queen Mary got the record down to below 4 days doing transatlantic crossing before she was eventually eclipsed by the SS United States. But for fuel economy purposes, they would run those ships generally at a 5-day schedule. And even that, compared to how you could make more money by running them slower, it was a balance, right? Because when you're driving a ship at speed, there's a certain point where the fuel consumption to speed ratio goes from being a gradual incline to an exponential scale.
Yeah, the point of diminishing returns.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's around about that 23, 24 knot mark, which is why you sort of see most of them max out at that speed. And so, when QE2 came into service, she was dual purpose. She did 5-day crossings until the 1990s, actually. And then Cunard gradually reduced the speed slightly to give her 6-day crossings, which is what was happening when Queen Mary 2 entered service. And then Queen Mary 2 did some 6-day crossings early in her career, and now they've extended them to 7. There's sometimes 8-day crossings. They sometimes tag on Hamburg as well, so you can have an extra day and come across from Europe. And really, it's about trying to find that balance between what people will accept for sea days. 7 sea days is probably about the max, and the cost it costs to run that ship across the Atlantic. And a ship like Queen Mary 2, she's got diesel electric engines that run the base power and get her to a certain speed. But if she wants to get faster than that, she has to use her gas turbines. The gas turbines are quite expensive to operate because they use much higher grade, much more expensive grade of fuel, much cleaner. So 7-day crossings are more affordable for running that ship, and probably more environmentally friendly as well.
And the thing about Cunard is, because they have the heritage of doing these crossings, they are expert at the onboard activities. Because people always say to me, aren't you going to get bored, without stopping? And what are you going to do? And it's like, there's so much to do. Partly because the ship is so wonderful and there's so much to do on board, because it's got a planetarium and it's got all this all these museum pieces all around the ship.
Yes.
Literally they've tried to educate you whilst you're on board, as well as Cunard insights and the type of lectures that you give on board. But I find that I am at my most zen and most happy when I am on a transatlantic crossing without the internet. Well, you can get the internet these days, but years ago when I started doing it, you couldn't get online. There was no such thing. And so it really was a very kind of isolating experience for the good, getting away from it all and actually not having to be on the phone with your mother or your friends for 7 days is rather wonderful.
I mean, old QE2 booklets that I've got from embarkation information, they used to send you these packages that had all these little pamphlets in them about the ship's deck plans and what to do on board. And one of them was communication from ship to shore. And what it was, they'd send it out months before the voyage, and it had the QE2's postal addresses in all of the major ports, and it also had her fax numbers. So there was a Pacific, an Atlantic, an Indian Ocean, and I think a South Atlantic as well. There was 4 of them. You could give that to your friends and family who, if they were prepared, could write to you and send it off, and then the mail would arrive at the port and be delivered into the ship, and you would get this letter under your door that's maybe been sent 2 months before from somebody in Australia who wanted to surprise you, like
Wonderful.
have a bon voyage, have a wonderful. And sometimes the travel agents here would do that. They would send off these letters, and they would arrive at the ship to welcome you on board. So different. And of course, in the late 90s, early 2000s, when the ships were coming into port, I mean, after 6-day crossings, you'd be arriving in New York, and you would just, on a ship with very few balconies, you would just see people lining the decks with their old Nokia phones waiting to get a signal.
Yes.
And
Yes.
the ship had tannoy system throughout, the speakers. And you remember the old phones? You used to hear that as it was receiving the messages.
Right.
All the speakers would start buzzing because everyone's phones were receiving all these text messages that had backed up for them whilst they were at sea, because you couldn't connect to the internet.